In the 1950s, scale models were morphing from all wood to all plastic. During this time frame, Guillows, a maker of flying scale models, mostly stick and tissue, both then and now, came out with a line of scale models that were all wood and paper. In the 1950s, scale models were morphing from all wood to all plastic. During this time frame, Guillows, a maker of flying scale models, mostly stick and tissue, both then and now, came out with a line of scale models that were all wood and paper. Other scale models of this time, like Strombecker and Monogram, that made solid wood models, were morphing them into partly wood and then partly wood and plastic and then into plastic. This B45 kit is from the series that Guillows made that was consistently all wood. The B-45 was the first operational jet bomber for the U.S. and was quickly replaced by the B-47. Advertised on the back of the box are some of the models that were available in this line. You'll note that they range from the North American T-28 trainer to the B-36 bomber. But the boxes were all exactly the same size, so the scale of the model varied greatly. The kits were sold in large numbers. You would find them not only in hobby shops and department stores, but in drug stores and convenience stores.
I used to work for Pratt & Whitney, the maker of jet engines. One test I was involved in was the early testing of TF-30 engines. This was done on a B-45. After a quick look at this picture, you might ask, how is this airplane supposed to land? Does it have extremely long landing gear? Since the B-45 is a bomber and has a bomb bay, that feature was lengthened and modified so the engine could be retracted into it. Well, almost. Some of it hang out a little bit, but it didn't drag on the ground. The B-45 would take off and land on the basic engines, and when in flight, the test engine would be lowered and it would be the power. It would then be retracted to land.
I wanted a model of a B-45, and this is the only one I was able to find. Disadvantages of this kit were basically the construction materials and technique. Without using things like plastic or metal castings, details were very vague, and engines like radial engines just looked like a piece of wood because that's what they were. Some aircraft designs lent themselves more to this form of construction than others. The ones that didn't were pretty disappointing. This line, like all lines, disappeared with the advent of fully plastic models. Let's look at the kit. Opening the box is going to be difficult because it actually isn't a box. It's a slide-through container. There are die-cut wood parts. Some are quite thin, 1/16 of an inch. Some of them are 1/8 inch. Minimal decals. And the only plastic part, a vacuum-formed canopy. Here are the plans. The exploded view and side view of the fuselage and the nacelles, and a generalized assembly procedure. Basically, the kit is built in this manner, then sanded as best as possible to the shape it should be in cross section, and the more rounded parts are covered with paper, which is actually just cut out of the plans. Okay, let's get started. We'll start out by punching out the sides here. And the spacers for the fuselage. So here's the fuselage ready for the final assembly, we'll glue the second side on here. Then we probably do the same for the nacelles. So I've glued the 1/8 inch thick top on top of the fuselage. It's as you can see, it's not exactly a precision fit, so I'm going to have to do some carving and some sanding.
Here's the completed structure of the fuselage and the nacelles. I glued the stabilizers together at the right dihedral angle.
I've installed the nacelles, and now we're to the point that makes these models not particularly realistic to me, and that is that we cover the bottom parts of the fuselage and the nacelles with theoretically paper cut out of the plans. I want to preserve the plans, so I copied them and cut out the parts. And the trouble is, this clearly will form a 90-degree angle here, here, and here, which doesn't exist on the real airplane. I've sanded it to have a little bitty radius, but it can only have a 1/16 inch radius because it's only 1/16 of an inch thick. So we'll put that on there and see how it goes. So I've trimmed the paper on the bottom. I've installed the tail. I've installed these little fairings on the back of the engines. The problem we have with the engines is that if you actually drilled the holes that would represent the inlet and the exhaust, they would completely take out the structural member that holds the nacelles together. So I'm going to try and simulate the engine inlet and exhaust with paint as best I can think of to do. There's really no instructions in the plans, although they do show a black dot for the inlet there. I'm not going to install the landing gear. There is landing gear provided in the kit. I think I'm just going to put it on a mount, though. The landing gear is pretty rudimentary, as you can see in the picture here, but it would be okay. So we're approaching time to finish and paint. Now, my experience as a kid was that if you painted this, the white part would come out shiny and smooth, and the balsa part would be affected by the balsa wood absorbing the paint and by the grain of the balsa wood, and you could paint multiple coats and it still would be, you know, dull and grainy. And the way I fixed that as a kid was to use sandable car primer, which my Uncle Bill gave me. He was a car mechanic. So I've got some Mr. Surfacer now rather than buy a whole can of spray paint from the auto store.
Here's the model painted with Mr. Surfacer. I don't know if this is the first or second coat. The first coat raised the grain so it looked even worse. I sanded it down and put on a second and third coat, and it became apparent I was never going to get there with that thinner sealer paint. I then painted it with spray aluminum.
Well, here's the finished B45. I took some liberties with it compared to the plans. First of all, there's no attempt at a glass nose because I'm sort of replicating the Pratt & Whitney B45, and it had a fiberglass nose. That may have been because it was made from an RB45, but probably more likely it was there just to make it lighter so it could lift the test engine. And obviously this plane also had a tail gunner's position, and that was not necessary in a test airplane, so it didn't have it. You can see that the effort to get rid of the balsa grain was unsuccessful even after 3 coats of Mr. Surfacer. This is not surprising to me. The Mr. Surfacer is meant for plastic and is a lot thinner than car body sanding sealer. I should have sprung for a can of the real thing. This Bearcat model that I made when I was about 13 from solid blocks of balsa wood shows that you actually can pretty much completely eliminate the grain of balsa wood if you put on the several coats of car sandable primer. Here is the B45, best I could do. I certainly should have done better. It is a representation of the B45 and it only cost $0.25.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you might consider my other videos. Also, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up and even a subscription. Thanks again.